about. So I think that was very successful, and the quality of the merchandise was just great.
I was very happy with the new layout as well. I sit in the exact middle of the fair, and there is usually a time about 3 o'clock when I think, how could I get out of here if I really, really wanted to? But there were clever new ways of laying out the same number of stalls, which meant that there were wider alleys between them, and some of them had been turned through 90 degrees. So instead of looking at the short end of the stall, we had the long 6-metre face of it, to be able to talk to the stallholder. That I really did appreciate. In the middle of the square it seemed less crowded, but then I suddenly realised it perhaps was the new layout. Now, who had anything to do with the recycling project? Because that was really interesting.
Well, I had a little bit to do with the recycling, in the sense that I ended up on a station at one stage, but I didn't have anything to do with actually organising it. A lot of people really took it to heart. A lot of folks came along with their recycling and popped them into the bins. But our problem was we had a bottle, like glass bottles and stuff. We had the plastic drinks bottle recycler, and we had the paper, and what's the other thing? Oh, and aluminium cans was the other one. Problem with the paper was just about every piece of paper that came to the recycling centre had a donut in it, or a piece of wrapped up piece of toffee, or some chips or something. So almost all paper ended up actually going into the bin. I did take the lid off the paper recycling bin once. The stuff in there was not really recyclable. So I think we'll do away with that next year, or Helen tells me they'll probably do away with that next year. But people were keen, and they came along with their bottles and chucked them into the bins. Incredibly expensive to buy the little caps. There's this plastic cap that puts on those wheelie bins, and I think they charge us about $1,000 each, or they cost $1,000 each for this piece of plastic about yay square. Opportunistic, I should think.
It's probably something terribly worthy, like gold standard recycled plastic. I did like the idea, though, of having someone, you included obviously, sitting on the recycled stand, because some people said some of they're like blackboard monitors almost. Just pop it over there, and people would follow instructions in a quite docile manner. But some people were quite clearly not used to sorting their own recycling. I'm glad we were able to do that, though, because I think it's nice to set a bit of an example. Right. And anything else about the fair?
Oh, I thought the announcements were great.
Oh, don't be so... Flattery will get you everywhere, Paul.
That's right. No, we have a great PA system, and we had to use it numerous times for lost people, lost children, lost credit cards. We ended up having to cut up a couple of credit cards. So if you lost your credit card at the Martinborough Fair, it's been chopped, unfortunately.
Fortunately, we
keep it and try and get it back to the people.
Yes, normally I take all the credit cards home and ring the bank and say, I have got this. But luckily one of our newer Rotarians is a ex-banker who knows all about the system. She said, no, cut it up, because that is what the bank will tell you now. Now that there is PayWave, they're too vulnerable out there. If you shouldn't have it and you do, just cut it up. And I can tell you that the only two we had to cut up were in fact BNZ. All the other bank customers seem to be quite good about hanging on to their stuff. We had no lost pets, very few lost family members. We did have some very, very extraordinary questions. The best one, and I really wasn't quite sure what she said, because at the moment she asked the question, it was very, very noisy. So she said, mumble, I've got a mumble orgy, and I don't think there are enough bars. And I rather thought, I wonder what occasion she thinks she's at, because we don't do orgies, and we certainly don't have any bars, although there are, of course, the usual pubs in Martinborough. But it turned out that when she repeated the question, it was, my phone is a 4G, and there aren't enough bars. And I discovered that what our clever technical people, I imagine you're among them, Paul, what our clever technical people had done was to downgrade the 4G cell phone system that was working in the fair to 3G, which did not affect anyone with a 4G phone at all, but meant that twice as many phone calls could come in and out, because we have often found that the cell phone system, which also runs a lot of the FPOS at the fair, has been known to go down under stress. So that was one of those days when there wasn't a water problem and there wasn't a phone problem, and I think we have learnt a lot of very useful things that will work very, very well for us next month, because of course this is only the first Martinborough Fair of the year, and next month we will have the second one, the March Fair, which is always, I think, it's nice usually because the weather's a little bit cooler, and I think we often have even more people coming along to shop, which is great. So we might see you at the Martinborough Fair, first Saturday of the month, first Saturday in March at the Martinborough Square. Right. Now Tamara in particular has been talking about fair bursaries, because of course that's one of the things that the money from the fair goes towards. So Tamara, would you like to give us a bit of a roundup of what we've done with bursaries for the people with the money from the fair, or some of the money from the fair?
Well, some of the money from the fair goes to college students to help them with their further education. And at the end of last year, we awarded 2 bursaries with money from the previous fair, and the students themselves and their college, in this case Kuranui, always very grateful for the help that we give them, and it just makes it that bit easier for these students to achieve their dreams. It's always a very heartwarming occasion when the students come to our Wednesday meeting and they tell us a bit about what they're going to do in the future and about their interests. We do give other grants to young people as well. That's not necessarily from fair money, but from money that we raise directly through organisations like the Wairarapa Trust. I think, Paul, you know quite a bit about that.
No, what Wairarapa? Oh, I might do. Perhaps I do. What's
Alan Maxwell?
Oh, the Wairarapa Whānau Trust.
That's the one I meant,
okay.
yes.
Yes, we have done a bit of work with the Whānau Trust, and they're really, I think, making an impact on the youth in Featherston, which is their main target area, I believe. So, no, they do great work. It's a Anglican Church initiative. Doing great things. I was chatting to Alan recently about trying to expand their web design and their IT training infrastructure, because there are other places within Featherston who have excess capacity and they could possibly use it. So I'm hoping that he'll sort of follow that along down the track of it.
Talking of young people, this year we've got what we call an outbound exchange student to Japan, a lovely young girl called Genevieve Nightingale. She's one of the youngest students to have been sent on a Rotary outbound exchange, and she gave us a fascinating talk about how she came to be interested in Japan. She's been studying Japanese and also martial arts, very well illustrated, you know, using video, very technologically adept, and altogether a delightful young person. So she has now left. She will be in Japan now. I haven't heard anything from her yet, but I'm sure we will.
No news is good news. And we're looking at the possibility of hosting a Japanese student in return. So that could be interesting. We've just got to find all the some families to host her and some people to do the mentoring and that sort of thing. We have quite a range of things that have to happen in order for someone to come and be a hosted exchange student. Well, we're looking forward to being involved.
These are only a few of the things that we do with the money for the Martinborough Fair, and I have asked Paul if he will play us a song, a song from a musical, Sweet Charity, because that's such a useful way of introducing some of the other charities we support. And while we're getting on with that, I'm actually going to go and hunt for the script that I have lost. So I brought 4 copies of it, so one of them's got to be somewhere. Paul, can we have a Sweet Charity, please?
Okay, it's on.
Here was a man with no dream and no plan, and one lonely night I found Sweet Charity. You make life fun for me, oh what it's done for me, having you around. Sweet Charity, warm words I've never said lately pop off the top of my head. It's incredible. Suddenly I'm the guy I never dared to be. Watch me touch the sky quite easily. So if you are free, Sweet Charity, please belong to me. Sweet Charity, please belong to me. Sweet Charity. Sweet Charity, please belong to me. Sweet Charity, please belong to me. Sweet Charity, please belong to me. Sweet Charity, belong to me.
Thank you, Paul. That was Sweet Charity. And one of the things we've been doing with some of our charity money is a project in the Solomon Islands. Now, I've been in the Solomons and I have seen the difference between some of the schools that have money and assets and some that do not. And when our Environment and International Committee, Pamela Messavi, was looking for a project in the Pacific, and let's face it, the Solomons are sort of nearly almost in the Pacific. In the Pacific, they were lucky to find someone who had got a village called Simba that needed some care and attention. So, Paul, can you tell me about that, please?
I'd love to. Now, so Pamela is the chair of our international committee assigned to this task. And she's given me a bit of a rundown, so I'm going to have to read it, I'm afraid, but bear with me. So, Simba Project from Pamela Messavi. So in 2018, the International Committee reached out to the Rotary clubs in the Pacific to identify potential projects. We had no luck through Rotary clubs, but managed to find some local contacts. Tequila and Bob McFarlane. Tequila and Bob live in Gizo. Tequila comes from the island of Simbo. She's a nurse and very active in community issues. Bob is an educator and is also involved in the development of their community. Simbo is made up of 2 small islands, about 30 kilometres from Gizo. Gizo is the second to largest city in the Solomon Islands. Life in Simba is simple, and most people live in houses made of sago leaf. People live sago leaf. Obviously you can build. Amazing. People live in a subsistence living and are self-sufficient, but life is hard. The population's reported to be 4,000. Water supply was good, but the system has fallen into disrepair. The soil is tired. The schools and health clinics have been neglected. A rebuild of the school and health centre was in progress, but it ceased just before the election in 2019, and beach toileting is the norm. I don't know whether I would be wanting to visit, actually, by the sound of it. But anyway, Simba receives little support from provincial or central government, but does get some support from international organisations. Tequila visited Simba Island on our behalf and discussed possible activities with local elders. Community leaders identified health, education and well-being activities for the people of Simba. Bed linen, mattresses, etc. for the new health centre, books for the library and school, basketball court to keep, quote, troublesome, unquote, youth occupied, equipment for the kindergarten. So we decided to focus on purchasing supplies to the health centre and the library. In 2018-2019 we sent some books for the library and some bed linen for the health centre. Shipping things to the Solomons was pretty expensive, and uplifting things when they arrived presented logistical challenges. The Rotary Club of Honiara is involved in getting the books delivered to Simba. We have access to a further 7 boxes of school journals which we can send to Simba. JR Orchards in Greytown send a container to the Solomon Islands each year when their seasonal workers return, and they've agreed to help us ship out books in their container. We plan to purchase something for the health centre, but this was put on hold as work on the centre was stopped due to elections. If you're watching, Pamela, that's very diplomatic. Some mattress covers were purchased in New Zealand and taken to Solomon Islands. Linen, mattresses and pillows will be purchased when the health centre is finished, should the health centre be finished. We have established a relationship with the Rotary Club of Gizo to exchange funds and work with use on this on possibly other projects. We've also established a link with the president of the Rotary Club of Honiara through Tequila and Bob, which should make processing books on arrival to the Solomon Islands smoother in the future. Now, there are some other possible projects for our club. In the future, we're looking to help out with their water supply. They had a number of water sources, what do they call those, taps with a pump handle on it, put in.
Standpipes.
Standpipes, is it right? Okay. All right, so they had some standpipes put in, but unfortunately the people who put them in hadn't trained the villagers in maintenance, and so of course when things got to disrepair they didn't know what to do with them. So many of the standpipes are now leaking and the taps are broken, but they only need some repair. So leakage and running water from broken taps reduces or stops water flowing to the villages along the pipes. So what was an assistance at the start is turning out to be a problem in the end. A program of maintenance is needed, and perhaps training a volunteer from each village would help with subsequent maintenance of pipes and taps. Inviting a trainer to do a very simple course on basic plumbing we believe will help with maintenance of pipes and taps. And at the end of the course we could provide some basic tools and spare parts. So that's a possible project off there for in Simbo. Another one is to repair the solar power. The school has a computer and printer powered by solar panels, batteries and an inverter that were donated by somebody in the past. It worked well until a strong wind smashed the panel, and it hasn't been working since. So it just needs a bit of maintenance. And for us here it just needs a bit of maintenance, but of course for them it's a big challenge, and getting help across there in terms of maintenance people is going to prove a bit of a logistical nightmare, I should think. However, a good project to get involved with. So currently the school has to send work to the provincial HQ at Gizo to do photocopying commercially, and it costs them a packet. Another possible project that we could get involved with is seashore protection. Simbo is sinking due to plate tectonics and climate change. In several places the coastline is being eroded. It's being suggested that help's needed to plant mangrove between villages and to build barriers with gabions within the villages. A program of awareness and of the importance of mangroves will help us provision as will provision of gabions, labour, rocks, etc. When then we had Tequila and Bob, you may remember, came and presented to our club in November, and that made quite an interesting insight into the issues that the people of Simbo face, and not the least is the political issues, where money that should be directed to their ends seems to be withheld in some way. Anyway, that's the Simba Project.
Funnily enough, I happened to be in the Solomons at about the time of the election before last, and I was amazed by wherever I went there seemed to be a volleyball court being built. And I said to my hostess, is this a very, very important part of cultural life? She said, yes and no. She said, when there is a volleyball court, of course they play volleyball. It's lovely to have an organised game that a lot of people can play. But the reason you're seeing all these courts being built is that the elections are coming up, and every Member of Parliament has a certain amount of money to spend on their village and their basically home territory. And at the end, before the election, it becomes clear that perhaps more could have been spent, and suddenly there is money for a volleyball court. And I was particularly interested because the volleyball court on the island nearest to where I was happened to be right beside the airstrip. And the airstrip, if you've ever seen the movie South Pacific, this was the airstrip that the CBs were building in the movie, at the beginning of the movie, when they suddenly dropped their tools and started singing "There Is Nothing Like a Dame." Before that, they were building an airstrip on this island, and the airstrip is the one that you still take off and land on. And I was looking at the basketball court and waiting for my plane, and when the plane started to arrive, I looked at it and thought, that is not the plane I arrived on, which was a 7 or 8 seater. This was a tiny little plane. You could probably have parked it quite comfortably in the studio. And when the plane landed, the pilot got out, and accompanied by the 2 men who manned the air terminal, which you certainly could have parked in this office, probably alongside the plane, sprinted to the middle of the runway, where she lay down. They all lay down and peered into a hole in the middle of the runway. And what had happened, the coral sand that was the basis of the runway had washed away, and what looked like a hole the size of a laundry basket turned out to be the very small hole in the roof of a very, very large cavern that had been washed away. So we all hopped into the plane, and with the very small plane took off on the very short bit of runway that was left. And as we were taking off, the pilot picked up the microphone, and she very firmly closed the airport. There certainly is a need for a lot of maintenance and things. There's a lot of islands, and they all have more or less subsistence village economies. The reason this one actually had an airstrip still was it was on the largest lagoon in the Solomons, and there are a great number of tourist activities nearby, and indeed fish and things like that are exported from that runway. But there is always a need for maintenance and help in the Solomons. My host in Honiara said, what can I do with my guards? He said, we have these guards because we need them, and all day they have nothing to do and they're getting bored. I was going down to see one of the local schools. It was a peripatetic school. It spent half the week at the fishing village and half the week at the rubbish tip. There was a child population in each, and the school would move from one to the other. He said, see if you can find something for the guards to do. Well, the village school was delighted. They had a roof. The roof was an enormous blue tarpaulin, and they had a concrete pad which they worked on, but the children were working, writing on paper with pencils on a concrete floor which is far less than ideal. And so I looked at that, and I looked at what the other children were doing, and we discovered that the guards were quite capable of, under supervision, building easels for the children to work at, and for the older ones who were working on their laps, clipboards. So it was something as simple as that was needed to make a difference to those children. Right, that's quite enough about the Solomons. Possibly a little too much. Where are we going now?
Well, back home, the thing that comes to mind was our food bank collection back last November, because it's not only the Pacific that needs assistance, but people here as well.
You're absolutely right. And all the three South Wairarapa towns, each has a collection. In fact, so of course do Carterton and Masterton, although I know less about those. But Andy Corrigan, who was organising the team I was on, which is the Featherston team, reported that the collection, which of course is preceded by a flyer drop and a special feature in the Times Age to cue the public in, we used the fire service, and they were wonderful. They go around with their sirens on. They they attract all the kids. The kids really want to give their tins of food to the fire engine. Every so often we have to park around the corner and unload the fire engine into the trailers and utes that we're driving, simply because if their fire engine got called to a fire, they don't want to be in a vehicle that's full of cans and gifts. But the gifts were outstandingly generous. Quite often it wasn't just a couple of cans, there was a big box or a big bag, and it was actually quite tight finding room on the trailers and the vehicles for the donations. Now, the Wairarapa Food Bank is based in Featherston, and it's now assumed responsibility to manage the donations in all of the district, and they work in with other local organisations to find the best way to reach the needy. Now I was driving I was driving Graham Evans's car, with a large car with a large trailer, which made life a lot easier for stowing stuff. And the fire brigade gave me one of their spare handheld radios, which was excellent. At one point I lost them. They'd got away from me because we had so much to pick up, and they were moving on ahead. And I said, "Where are you? Please, where are you?" And they said, "Look behind you." And sure enough, they'd gone to the end of a long road and were turning on the way back. Graham, of course, at one point took a particularly long hike up to One Tree Hill. But even when they just sort of said something like, "We've just done Titoki Grove," it meant I didn't have to go down there and, with Graham's rather large car and rather large trailer, do a 97-point turn to get out again. And it was heartwarming to drop off the last load at Indigo's garage. Indigo is the manager of the food bank, and to see how pleased she was with the huge amount donated. She had a big team sorting boxes and bags as they arrived, and we thought, we're going to just overwhelm her. She will be daunted. But she was not remotely daunted. It seemed to be far more of a haul than last year. Eileen Ward from Greytown thanked everybody, especially the Greytown ambulance and the Greytown fire trucks. She said they were the stars of the night, attracting children who, with their eyes sparkling with beaming smiles, held their small bundles of food to donate. The scouts in Greytown came out and forced to do a lot of the legwork, quite a lot faster than some of our elder Rotarians, much faster than me for certain, and it looked as if they were having fun as well. At one point, three of them, Kevin, Eileen and Steve, the Rotarians, got left behind at the south end of Greytown while the trucks zoomed back to the fire station miles away to unload the booty. If you have to unload fire engines, you're doing very, very well with the generous collection. That's wonderful. And in Martinborough, breezy but fine, they provided 2 of their appliances, and by appliances, of course, I mean fire trucks, I don't mean egg beaters, 2 of their appliances and their new support vehicle, which led the 2 rotary utes and a car trailer combo around the borough streets collecting the food donations. Although at times there was a disconnect between the fire support vehicle and the following car trailer combo, that's why I needed the radio. You do get a disconnect. But the end result was very, very much a success. The generosity of many locals never ceases to amaze, and this generosity included a number of cash donations, as did the Featherstone one as well, which was great. And then, of course, we tend to find a local watering hole to have a bit of a lunch together or a bit of a supper together after it, because by the time you've run like mad to collect all the tins, done 97-point turns in the cul-de-sacs, and smiled like mad for an hour and a half to 2 hours with the thanks. I'm just sorry we just don't have a thank you very much tape to play on a loudspeaker as we're driving round. Masterton did well as well. They declared a record annual food bank collection, and they used emergency services, community organisations, school students, businesses, clubs and individuals. It's not just Rotarians. It's amazing who comes out of the woodwork to help. And their food bank coordinator, Lynn Tankersley, said that volunteers had packed 396 banana boxes of food. Last year they packed 280. So that's oh heavens, what is that? A more than 30% increase, isn't it? She said it was absolutely fantastic night. The community came to our assistance, and that just goes to show the generous community spirit of this area that is fostered by its leaders, she said. I think the volunteers were exhausted by the end of the night, but rapt at how much we collected. Tankersley said it was great to see the emergency services and students get behind the effort, and she thanked the Rotary Club of Martinton South for organising it. So that's Rotary Clubs of South Wairarapa, Masterton South, and she said there had been more food brought in on the Thursday morning from places that had missed out on being collected. So people wanting to drop in their food could then take it to the fire station, supermarkets, the food bank and Masterton Paper Plus. And I noticed the Featherstone supermarket, Super Value, now has a collection depot for the food bank. It's become not just one night of the year, it's something you can do at any stage. Non-perishable food, and I know that Indigo in Featherstone in particular said if your fruit trees are bearing far more than you know what to do with, you take it in the early afternoon to the food bank, which is in the courthouse beside the library, and they can add it to the food parcels that are going out that day, which is great. Now, what else?
Well, all this talk of food reminds me of, Rotary's not all hard work. We have a Christmas party.
Oh, yes.
Every year. And that always, of course, involves lots of food and drink and is a very convivial occasion. And we have entertainment. We have a fellowship committee, and they organise these sort of evenings and other special occasions. So they do food, they do wonderful table decorations.
I've been overwhelmed by their table decorations. I went to the one, now what was it? It had a magnificent tribute to that singer who had recently died. Whom do I mean? Not Ella Fitzgerald. Or do I mean Ella Fitzgerald?
No, I can't remember.
Well, I could not believe the talent that had gone into the setup and the decorations. Coordinated set pieces, flowers. Someone somewhere missed a brilliant career as a window dresser. Fortunately, he also had a brilliant career as a headmaster, so I suspect that that was satisfying. But no, the decorations and the themes in particular for things like changeover and
the soccer one.
I missed the soccer one.
We had an incoming president who was a big soccer fan, and the decorations in the hall reflected, I forget which club it is that he supports.
Arsenal, of course.
Arsenal.
And it was brilliantly put together.
It was brilliantly put together. So Indeed, it is not just hard work. There is the fellowship, and this is particularly obvious backstage at the fair. Everyone was very supportive of everybody else, and people would come tottering in and be revived with coffee and supportive chat to get on with it until they went out to do their next circuit.
And supported by Inner Wheel.
Yes, Inner Wheel.
Who we should recognise.
Inner Wheel is a adjunct, as it were, to the Rotary Club. If you look at the Rotary Club, of course, it's got that notched wheel, very, very engineering and is. But of course, an inner wheel is what keeps the outer wheel moving. And a number of the inner wheel people, in particular, are either retired Rotarians or indeed spouses of Rotarians. And they meet once a month and do their own fundraising as well. So someone has actually invited me to join. I said, I'm looking forward to it, but not just yet, thank you. But Inner Wheel are magnificent, and they did a constant running buffet. Because, of course, if you're doing the Martinborough Fair, some people set their alarm clocks for 5 a.m. Some people set it for 3:30 to get there in time to do all the things that they have to do. I set mine to 5 because there are ravening hordes of ducks and chickens and things like that have to be fed before daylight. But then I don't actually have to be doing anything until 7. So I'm very, very lucky. But the people who are doing things at 3:30 are sometimes also the same people who went in the day before and did what we call marking out, which is marking out the different areas for the stalls. And if you happen to be driving through Martinborough anytime soon, you will find that there are, in fact, still the ghosts of stalls past, which will only need primping up with a tiny bit more chalk paint to be stalls for the future. Now, Paul, I know you've brought your guitar along, and this is one of the highlights of some Rotary meetings, is that Paul tends to get the guitar out, and it's well worth listening to. So would you like to make a small contribution?
Make some music, of course. Good. How's our time going?
We've actually got, I think it's about another 15 minutes, have we not?
Okay. Well, I could do a song then.
You
Absolutely.
do a song, and I will try not to rattle my papers while I find something else to say.
Very good. I recently went to the Carterton Rotary Club Barons Night celebration, and they piped in the haggis, and there was bits of haggis, or they had a vegetarian haggis as well, which I managed to snag a piece of that. But I tried out the haggis later on, and it was quite presentable. I was also introduced to to whiskey. My early years, I decided whiskey was mostly going to be used for liniment, but the chap I was sitting next to convinced me to try some whiskey, and I must confess it went down quite well. But anyway, on the night I sang a song which was penned by Robbie Barnes. It was my first attempt at singing the song, so here's my second attempt. A Fond Kiss. A fond kiss and then we sever. A farewell and then forever. Deep in heart-wrung tears I'll pledge thee. Warring sighs and groans I'll wage thee. Who shall say that fortune grieves him, while the stars of hope she leaves him? In a cheerful twinkle lights me dark despair, and around the nights me. I'll ne'er blame my partial fancy, nothing could resist my Nancy, but to see her
is to love her, love but her, and love forever. Had we never loved so kindly, had we never loved so blindly, never met nor never parted, we'd have never been broken hearted. Fare thee well, my best and fairest, fare thee well, thou best and dearest, thine be ilka joy and treasure, peace, enjoyment, love, and pleasure. A fond kiss and then we sever, a farewell and then forever. Deep in heart-wrung tears I'll pledge thee, warring sighs and groans I'll wage thee.
So there we are, A Fond Kiss by Robbie Burns. I also sang that song, Mull of Kintyre, which I did a bit of research on at the time and found out that Paul McCartney had written it and not Rod Stewart. Well, who knew? Anyway.
Who knew? And I have to say that, Paul, I have never heard you sing that before. I liked it particularly much, and I shall certainly be going on to the Arrow FM webpage and playing it again so I can listen to it properly while I'm not trying to think about who has to say what next. I'm glad you were at Burns Night because it reminds me of another poem by Burns, which you will have heard, The Address to the Haggis, which begins, "O noble chieftain of the pudding race." And I thought, yes, now I know a joke about a pudding race. How do you start a pudding race?
Asking me. Well, I suppose you say, get ready, Teddy, go, or something.
You say go.
Oh, God.
And I thought of it, unfortunately, while you were talking about the Simba village and the sago leaves. I thought, yes, there is another use for sago as a boarding house type pudding, which is not unlike wallpaper paste in many ways and not unlike glue, but is also a nice little joke based on the Robbie Burns thing. Right, on a much more serious note, one of the things that we do worldwide with Rotary is promote disease protection and prevention. And 2030 is the year that Rotary International, which is of course our sort of overriding parent body, Rotary International hopes to finish providing everybody in the world with safe water, sanitation and hygiene. We believe that good health care is everyone's right, yet 400 million people in the world can't afford or don't have access to basic health care. And if you think about it, it's not so very far from home. We think sadly about using the beaches as a toilet and things like that, but if you think of the problems we seem to be having on some of the tracks that people tramp around New Zealand, encouraging people to use the toilets that DOC and the other track authorities do put in, and think of the contagion issues with beach toilets, or even the sad things that, well, the disturbing things that happen in our own townships where suddenly one of our towns may not have drinking water. And there is a great disease risk there too. Disease results in misery, pain and poverty for millions of people worldwide. So Rotary lead efforts, large and small, setting up temporary clinics, blood donation centres and training facilities in underserved communities struggling with outbreaks and healthcare access. We design and build out infrastructure that allows doctors, patients and governments to work together. Our members combat diseases like malaria, HIV/AIDS, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, diabetes, and polio. And I will say more about polio later, because it seems to be an obsession of mine. Prevention is important, which is why we also focus on health education and bringing people routine hearing, vision, and dental care. And we do this by educating and equipping communities to stop the spread of diseases, and there are hundreds of Rotary Health projects around the world at any given time. But one of the most important ones I think we're still doing is the work to eliminate polio. And there was an article in the Herald on the 19th of November which read, "Clerics issue fatwas to end vaccine panic." And we have the support of the leading Muslim clerics, and they're supporting Pakistan's polio vaccination program in an attempt to end Islamist violence against medical staff and dispel panic that shots can be fatal. The article goes on to say doctors' research suggests that these drops and vaccines are useful for the prevention of harmful diseases, and this polio vaccine is not dangerous. And that news came out just before End Polio Day last year, which was the 24th of October, and that was the full article was originally from the Times of London. That has been a problem with people, and particularly I think since the CIA disguised themselves as vaccinating surveyors when they were looking for Osama bin Laden, and it created a doubt as to, is this vaccine really genuine, or is it some strange program of the Americans that we should be doubtful about? Well, to have the leading Muslim clerics in Pakistan supporting us is just great. And the other person who supports us, or rather the other couple who support us very, very well, is Bill Gates and his wife Melinda. And through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they double any funds that we raise for polio vaccination. And already, even since Paul and I last talked about polio here, what only seems like a couple of months ago, and probably was, already there has been an improvement, and the wild polio viruses in particular are coming back under control, which is fantastic.
I thought the Gates Foundation actually gave us 2 for 1, virtually tripled.
Oh.
So what Rotary put together, I seem to remember they put 2 for 1.
Paul, I'm sure you're right. I'm one of those people who, left alone with numbers, can cause an awful lot of trouble. If Bill and Melinda Gates are giving to us, I think their generosity is making all the difference. And if it's 2 for 1, that is brilliant. Thanks, Paul, for correcting me.
And they have just recently re-engaged and reaffirmed their support for the whole polio program. But it's absolutely staggering to think that just such a short while ago, polio was an epidemic. It was hundreds of thousands of people were dying or contracting and being affected by polio, and now they count the numbers of polio sufferers in the 1 here or 10 there or 60 there. It's staggering.
Yes, it's single double digits.
Yes, it's this last little bit that's going to take time. This is where the big push needs to happen.
Well, I'm just old enough to remember the time when the schools were closed, and the correspondence school was responsible for education because they didn't want people to gather in places like swimming pools and schools and things because of the risk of contagion. Very much like the problem we're having with the coronavirus at the moment. The risk of contagion was such, you're not going to the cinema, you'll get polio. You're not going to the swimming pool, you get polio. And there are still people my age and up to about 10 years older still suffering from either the problems that they had when they were young with legs and irons and things like that, or with the polio virus, which can come back somewhat in different ways. If you suffered from it as a child, it's about now that it might be coming back to some people. So that's Bill and Melinda Gates, thank you. Right, what do we do now? Wants to talk about what? And how long have we got? Not very long.
I think our time is just about up. It's gone very quickly.
What time have we got to knock off?
We're going to knock off in another 4 minutes.
Right.
So, Paul, do you have another song coming on? I would love to hear Mull of Kintyre if you happen to have it about your person.
Well then, for you, just because it's you, the Mull of Kintyre. Sound levels.
Mull of Kintyre, oh, mist rolling in from the sea. My desire is always to be here, oh, Mull of Kintyre. Far have I travelled, and much have I seen, dark distant mountains and valleys of green, past painted deserts with sunsets on fire, as he carries me home to the Mull of Kintyre. Mull of Kintyre, oh, mist rolling in from the sea. My desire is always to be here, oh, Mull of Kintyre. Sweep through the heather like deer in the glen, carry me back to the days I knew then. Nights when we sang like a heavenly choir of the life and the times of the Mull of Kintyre. Mull of Kintyre, oh, mist rolling in from the sea. My desire is always to be here, oh, Mull of Kintyre. Smiles in the sunshine, tears in the rain, still take me back where my memories remain. Flickering embers grow higher and higher as they carry me back to the Mull of Kintyre. Mull of Kintyre, oh, mist rolling in from the sea. My desire is always to be here, oh, Mull of Kintyre.
I have to think of an ending, which I haven't figured out yet.
Well, that's okay. And that, singing like a heavenly choir, was President Paul, president of the Rotary Club of South Wairarapa. Thank you for listening to this Rotary Matters program. You'll be able to find it again if you want to hear the music, or maybe you can hear us talking again on the Rotary Matters part of the Arrow FM webpage. Good afternoon.